Hey, my friend, today's episode is all about food. How to eat the right food to beat disease, fight cancer, get glowing skin, help with hair loss, and a whole lot more. Stay tuned. Hello, and welcome to today's show. My guest on this show is Dr. William Li, who's an internationally renowned physician, scientist, and author of the New York Times bestseller, Eat to Beat Disease: The New Science of How Your Body Can Heal Itself. His groundbreaking work has led to the development of more than 30 new medical treatments and impacts care for more than 70 diseases, including cancer, diabetes, blindness, heart disease, and obesity. His TED Talk, Can We Eat to Starve Cancer, has garnered more than 11 million views. Dr. Li has appeared on Good Morning America, CNN, CNBC, and The Dr. Oz Show, and he has been featured in USA Today, Time Magazine, The Atlantic, and O Magazine. He's the president and medical director of the Angiogenesis Foundation and is actively researching COVID-19. Wow, that's a lot of accomplishments. Before we get started, you can access the show notes for this episode at antiaginghacks.net/eat to beat disease. Dr. Li, welcome to the Anti-Aging Hacks Show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be on.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for coming on the show. It's such an honor to have you here. First of all, let's get started with your background and how you got interested in food and angiogenesis.
Well, these are sort of converging worlds for me. I'm a physician, an internal medicine doctor, and I always wanted to not only take care of patients, but really be involved with research to understand where the future of medicine was going to come from. So I looked at, I was captivated by an area of research called angiogenesis. And angiogenesis it sounds like a fancy Greek word, but it's actually, simply put, the growth of blood vessels. It's how the body grows our circulation. So most people don't know that we have 60,000 miles worth of blood vessels packed inside our body. And these same blood vessels are what allows oxygen and nutrition. So whatever we eat has to be delivered through this huge conduit of this network to every cell in our body. So that's kind of connected to food just by the nature of our circulation. In terms of food itself, I've long been interested in food. And in fact, long before the Mediterranean diet, what became trendy to talk about, I had taken a gap year after college before I went to med school, and I went to the Mediterranean. I lived in Italy and Greece to study how the food there and the culture there impacted on health and lifestyle. And so, my interest in this space is, really goes way back into my early interests. And what's nice about these worlds coming together is that I've discovered that the foods that we eat, actually can help our blood vessels grow better when we need them, but they can also cut them off when we want to starve cancers, for example, of their blood supply. And so this powerful idea of food and health is not just about the food, it's about how our body responds to what we feed it.
That's great. I'm glad to hear that you've been or lived in Italy and Greece to learn about this. I myself visited Okinawa last year, and I wanted to do all the blue zones this year, but that's hard to do. But I certainly learned about their way of how they eat. They've got gardens in the backyards, and it's very interesting to learn from these civilizations that really eat their food, take the time, and do some social harmony along with eating their food. So, but getting back to you, you gave a TED Talk in 2010 about angiogenesis, which blew up, and it's got, I think, over 11 million views, which is amazing. I watched the talk, and I was utterly fascinated, more so because recently I've gotten into angiogenesis myself as a way to keep looking younger and keep my hair on my head and have it thicker and stronger. So can you explain a little bit more how angiogenesis has to be in perfect harmony in the body, and what happens when we get out of sync on both sides?
Right. Well, so blood vessels, which are so important for bringing oxygen and nutrients everywhere, live in harmony in our body. It's in a balance. So our body knows how to actually create just the right number of blood vessels, not too many, not too few. You had too many, you'd feed disease. If you didn't have enough, your organ would actually starve. And this idea of homeostasis, or a perfect set of balance, is actually pretty common. If you really think about it, our body body's immune system works the same way. When we're healthy, we don't have a hyperactive immune system, nor are we immunodeficient. We're just kind of just right. Blood pressure is the same way, like we all get whipped up with anxiety every now and then, but our body brings it right back down. And if we don't drop way below either, we'd actually, we'd collapse. And so this idea of homeostasis, I call it the Goldilocks zone. If you remember, not too hot, not too cold, not too hard, not too soft, but just right is actually where angiogenesis or blood vessels actually sit. We're born with our blood vessels and they grow when we need them, but otherwise we just have the perfect amount. And why that's important with aging, for example, is that we know many of the conditions associated with aging. For example, the loss of elasticity of the skin, the thinning of the skin, is due to the weakening or thinning out or disappearance of the blood vessels that support the skin. In order for the skin to be nice and thick and pliant and healthy and radiant, you need good blood flow. In fact, the radiance of our skin itself is due to our circulation. Good circulation, good skin. Same thing as hair. Turns out that most people, people often lose their hair as they get older. Under each hair follicle, the hair bulb is a single blood vessel capillary that feeds that bulb. When that capillary goes away, your hair kind of just can't hang on. It's not getting the oxygen and nutrients. And so having the right balance of blood vessels is incredibly important as we age. And of course, I just told you about the skin and the hair, but you can imagine how important that would be in the brain or in the heart.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And we're going to get into all of that in just a few questions. But first, there's a lot of doctors and PhDs, Dr. Lee, that are out there, but you seem to have a celebrity fan base, including The Edge from U2, who sits on your board of your foundation, and your nonprofit, Bono, Cindy Crawford, Dr. Oz, the list goes on. How did you get so famous?
Well, listen, I have always just focused on my work, and my work is about making connections and looking at commonalities between, what connects the heart, the brain, and the lungs, your blood vessels. And similarly, that's how I kind of have worked with people. I've been really fortunate, privileged to meet people who have a great deal of influence and success in their own fields, who are really interested in the cutting edge of science and medicine and health. And in some cases, I've actually been able to be helpful to them and their families in some way, shape, or form. And that's really, I think that people who have been very successful in their own fields, it's kind of a small world that we all kind of somehow meet together. It's kind of like this parallel universe of people. I think athletes are the same way. People that are highly accomplished in athletics, or people who are highly accomplished in technology. They kind of know each other in some way, shape, or form. And so I've really tried to be a messenger for advanced ways of thinking about health. And anybody, regardless if they're famous or not, who's interested in that work, I love to partner with them, collaborate with them, get to know who they are.
Yeah, that's amazing. In this world of us popping a pill for every malady out there, the going back to basics to our food seems such a refreshing concept. And I'm glad to hear that we finally have some tools. And so you mentioned, I believe in one of your talks recently, is that now we can finally, for the first time, measure foods like we measure drugs. Can you explain how we do that?
Right. Well, the whole idea of food as medicine is kind of a concept. And when I got into this field over 10 years ago, I really wanted to be able to use the same principles of science, the rigor of science, actually the same approaches that we use to develop medicines, drug development, biotech, to be able to study food. And what I realized very quickly as I thought about that more than 10 years ago is that, you can order something online, it's a powder chemotherapy, and pop it in, and within a couple of days in a lab, you'd figure out what's going on. But if you ordered a pizza or ordered a salad and said, brought it to a lab, the researchers would scratch their heads because they wouldn't know how to study it. So I set out to really figure out how to dismantle food into its important parts, whole foods, and study how that would actually influence processes like angiogenesis. Because when it comes to food and health, it's not just about the food. It's about how our body responds to what we put inside it. So That kind of response testing is exactly the type of testing that we do in life sciences and biotechnology. And so what I think is really great and super exciting is now we're at the beginning of a new era to be able to study foods in those same systems.
Amazing. Response testing is the way to go, and I can't wait to see what you test more in the future and the discoveries you make. Now, you wrote a book called Eat to Beat Disease, which I got my hands on this week, and I've been nerding out. Like, I've taken copious amounts of notes as I've gone through the book, and I've probably highlighted over, I don't know, 100 or 200 sections within the book itself. And your writing style also makes it easy to read. It kind of reminds me of Dr. Sandra Kaufman's book, who wrote a book about how to slow down your aging as well. Now, in this book, you talk about the 5 defense systems that we have in our body. Will you please quickly explain those before we jump into some of the point questions I have?
Super easy. Our health is actually not just the absence of disease, but our health is a result of our body's hardwired health defense system. So think about like a laptop, right? You get a laptop from a store. It's hardwired to be able to do it. You have to download some software, but basically the computer is designed and it contains everything it needs to do to function. Same thing as our body. Our body is hardwired to maintain health, and those hardwired systems are our health defense systems. They are firing on all cylinders from the time we're born until our last breath. And I write about 5 of them. There's probably many, many more of them, but 5 of these systems that I write about have been studied in biotechnology. We know that they're important. We know that they work. And so angiogenesis, our circulation, our stem cells, regenerative medicine is kind of hotly in development in biotech. Well, our body does it by itself. Our microbiome, everybody knows our gut bacteria, our gut health is really important. And now we know, we're beginning to appreciate just how important it is. DNA is not just a genetic code. Our DNA protects us from the environment, damage from the environment. And that's a defense system. And our immunity, which every grandmother told their grandkids that you need to have a good immune system, is much more powerful than we thought. Because we used to think that as you get older, as you age, your immune system actually declines. And to some extent that's true. But we now know from immunotherapy of cancer that even if you're in your 80s or 90s, if you give your immune system a chance to do its job, even in your 80s and 90s, our immune system is strong enough to wipe out cancer, including metastatic cancer, and bring you back to zero cancer, which is really astounding. And so these are 5 of the body's hardwired health defense systems I write about in my book, Eat to Beat Disease. And then I write about 200 foods and the evidence that's out there that they can activate, which foods activate these defense systems.
One of the first things you said in that book was we all have cancer. And I think this one we should delve into just a little bit for listeners to understand what you mean by that. So when you say we all have cancer, what do you mean, Dr. Lee?
Well, cancer used to be viewed as, something that you were diagnosed with almost, one day you were fine, the next day, you went to the doctor and you discovered you had cancer. But cancers don't happen that way. They don't spring up, like a bruise. Cancers develop really, really slowly over the course of years. And in fact, they are just normal cells that have gone wrong. Healthy cells gone bad are exactly what cancers are. And the important thing is we've got trillions of cells in our human cells in our body, like 39 trillion human cells. They're dividing all the time in order to keep us alive. And all you have to do is to make 1 or 2 mistakes when they divide. And you've got a mutation. And that little mistake is really a cancer. So we're actually filled with microscopic cancers, just like pimples that form on our skin all the time. But a cancer cannot grow larger than about 2 millimeters in diameter. That's about the size of the tip of a ballpoint pen, because they don't have a blood supply. So they can grow that size and they won't kill you. They can't go anywhere. And then and they're isolated from blood supply, so they're starved. And then your immune system cruises by like a beat cop cruising a neighborhood looking for trouble. When they see that little tiny microscopic cancer, immune system, puts on its red lights, pulls over the bad guy cells, tiny little nets of cells, and just, identifies, hey, you're not normal. I think you're a cancer, and just wipes them right out. It's kind of like erasing the cancer. This happens over and over and over again, and we don't even know it. We know we get cancer when the small, tiny little cancer cells escape the cops, escape the immune system. They find out how to hijack our normal circulation to selfishly grow blood vessels for themselves. And then all of a sudden, the cancer can grow. In fact, research has shown that a cancer that it doesn't touch blood vessels can't get larger than, kind of a grain of rice. But once blood vessels grow to it, a cancer can grow 16,000 times in size in just 2 weeks. And the same blood vessels that feed the cancer allow cancer cells to escape and land elsewhere in your body. And so this concept of angiogenesis in cancer really is a matter of life and death.
And a follow-up question I had, Dr. Lee, is most of our cells are connected to blood vessels. They're pretty close in proximity to blood vessels. Mm-hmm. So for a cancer to grow, does it have to hijack a blood vessel directly to that cell for it to grow really big? Or could it just say, I'm in close proximity and therefore I've got enough blood that I need so I can grow regardless?
Yeah, it's a great question. So basically, here's what we know about how cancers hijack the circulation to allow themselves to grow. Every cell in our body is about 100 microns away from the nearest blood vessel. And, that's a couple of hairs length away. And so we got a lot of blood vessels in our body. I told you 60,000 miles worth of blood vessels packed inside our body. But a cancer, when it sprouts, if it's within 100 microns, it can actually imbibe, it's like suck up the oxygen from around the side. It's kind of like wicking up the nutrients. But what cancers really need in order to be able to grow is to attract the blood vessels to sprout into themselves. And the way they do this is really devious. Cancer cells will create the same proteins that our body uses to heal wounds. So if you ever scraped your knee and had a scab that fell off too early, you saw all this bright red stuff underneath it, like that's angiogenesis, that's your wound healing response. And cancers basically copy and paste the body's normal proteins like that, and they just dump all those blood vessel growing proteins out around themselves. And so it's like putting fertilizer in the lawn. And so all of a sudden the blood vessels see that fertilizer, they think it's like a wound, and they just start sprouting into the tumor. And that's when the blood vessels that actually penetrate the cells, meaning that, or the nest of cells, all of a sudden it's being fed oxygen and nutrients directly so it can actually expand.
I gotcha. And there's many foods that you recommend in the book that naturally fight cancer and naturally fight this excessive angiogenesis that the cancer can cause. Can you touch a few of these foods?
Yeah, some of the most dramatic foods that fight cancer are the ones that I find they're some of my favorite foods. And that's really an important take-home message, is that the stuff that's good for you doesn't, it can actually taste great. When I got into this field, I thought, it would be no fun for anybody if the foods that were good for you tasted crappy. And it's also really not a really good message for people, hard to stick to if, healthy foods was all about shame, guilt, and fear and elimination. I think human nature abhors deprivation. So when you say, you can't have something, you want to have something. The good news is that foods that actually cut off the blood supply to tumors are foods like tomatoes, right? So, think about how many things you can slice it. You can make it into a soup. You can actually make a sauce with it. Well, tomatoes contain a natural chemical. And this is the important point. Mother Nature has laced foods, fresh, mostly produce, but not only produce, including some seafood, and with natural chemicals that in plants have a defensive role for the plant. So, for example, in tomato, there's lycopene. Lycopene adds to color. It actually has a natural insecticide kind of property to it. And when humans ate foods, plant-based foods for the first time, those natural chemicals that serve the plant all of a sudden had a new job description, which is that they interact with our human bodies. And so, for example, for lycopene, we've discovered it's a powerful anti-angiogenic, blood vessel stopping, cancer starving substance. And how do we know this is true? Because, we've studied in a laboratory with the National Cancer Institute and published on it. But what's even more amazing is that when you actually study people, like 30,000 men who over many years, and you find out that those men who ate 2 to 3 servings of cooked tomatoes every week had a 30% lower risk of developing prostate cancer. Well, prostate cancer depends on blood vessels growing into them. And so here's eating something that actually can cut off the blood supply. How do we know this is true? Well, in that study, they actually biopsied the prostate and found that the more tomato sauce you ate, the fewer blood vessels were feeding the prostate cancers. And so, this is really the entire arc of proof that foods really do have an impact, a meaningful impact in life-threatening diseases. And by the way, tomatoes are really delicious. I'll tell you one additional little wrinkle, and this is how deep we've gotten into this. Lycopene that occurs in nature in a tomato, like you pick it off a vine and you try to eat it like an apple, the form of lycopene there is not really very bioavailable to the body. So like it's hard for the body to absorb that form. But if you actually heat the tomato, the heat in a tomato, and you heat it up like simmering it, the heat changes the chemical structure very gently. And the chemical lycopene will change its form into a way that your body loves to absorb it. So it goes from a form that in nature is hard to absorb to one that avidly is absorbed. And because lycopene is what we call a fat-soluble vitamin, so or fat-soluble molecule, it dissolves in oil and it absorbs in oil. So the best way to actually heat tomato to convert the lycopene with a little bit of olive oil. Well, what did I just tell you? Olive oil, tomato, heat it up. Well, that's the basis of tomato sauce in a Mediterranean diet. And so this is actually, how this research of food of medicine actually connects to culture, and it connects to who we are and the things that are right around us that are easy to actually incorporate in our everyday lives.
Right. That's great. Now, one of the foods that you've mentioned as a food that fights cancer or the overgrowth of blood vessels is soy, of course. And that, as you know, you've probably been asked 100,000 times about soy and the phytonutrients in the soy. There's reports that, those phytonutrients can exacerbate breast cancer and or lead to a drop in testosterone in men. How would you respond to those reports?
Right. Well, right concept, wrong in interpretation. So a lot of urban legends have emerged about soy. First of all, soy is a legume. It is grown and eaten in Asia in large quantities every day. And although there is a plant estrogen, a phytoestrogen in there called genistein, and a few others, if you look at the chemical structures of the plant estrogen and the human estrogens, they look nothing alike. And if you study them in the lab, they don't do the same thing. In fact, the plant estrogen blocks the human estrogen. So plant estrogens are kind of like Mother Nature's tamoxifen, which is used to block estrogen to treat breast cancer. Most people don't know that, but I think it was well-intentioned people that were trying to just interpret, well, it's a plant estrogen, so maybe it's got to do the same bad things as human estrogen. That's a misinterpretation. Now, how do we know that it's actually helpful and not harmful? Well, this is where food as medicine research comes in. We've studied soy phytoestrogens in the same labs that we developed cancer drug, and it's a very powerful anti-angiogenic, cancer-starving natural substance. And in fact, when you test it in the lab to do lab research, you can see that it really stops tumor growth. And then the real proof is in the pudding. And there was a study in 2009 in the Journal of the American Medical Association, a very distinguished medical publication, in 5,000 women who already had breast cancer. And the study showed that those women who would be at highest risk, who ate more soy, they actually had a 30% decreased risk in the chances of dying from their breast cancer. And so again, you would think that the people who would be at the higher risk would be pushed over the edge. In this case, it rescued them. So, I think that it's really important when you hear common ideas about food and health to really ask. I tell people, ask about the data, see what the actual research actually shows. You need to have a reason to believe, as I say, And the reason should always be informed by science. It could be laboratory science. It could be clinical trials. And it also could be population studies, like that study of 5,000 women who already had breast cancer. That was called, by the way, called the Shanghai Breast Cancer Study.
Got it. That's very interesting. And, when I was in Japan and Okinawa last year, I noticed this as well. In the food that they eat, there's a lot of stir-fried vegetables that they eat, but tofu is almost in every meal. And in the back of my head, I was thinking, there's a lot of soy in this food, but yet these people are living some of the longest lives in the entire world. So it can't be that harmful. So thank you for answering that. Now, is there a type of soy that's better than others? For example, is fermented better than not? Is GMO versus non-GMO, organic versus non? Do you have any recommendations there for people?
Yeah, well, the research has been pretty interesting. It's shown that actually fermented soy concentrates this genistein, the good stuff, the actual cancer-starving stuff. So fermented tofu, for example, with a natto bean, actually has huge amounts of this. And the great thing about soy, especially if you look into it, is that in Asia, they've come up with, hundreds of different ways to actually eat soy and prepare soy. I think, in America, we tend to, have like a couple of blocks, in a package that you can cut up in your salad. But really, it's a very, very versatile food. Mm-hmm. And you're absolutely right. In Asia, women who have breast cancer are not told to eat less soy or cut it out. They're told to eat more plant-based foods, including soy foods. So, the proof is in the pudding. And the pudding in this case is how well people do in other parts of the country. It's very important to realize that in other parts of the world, food is second nature to health, and we need to appreciate and learn from other cultures.
Okay, great. Now, here's the big question. So there's obviously advantages to being in homeostasis, not too many blood vessels or not too few, because both of them can lead to diseases longer term. But for most of these diseases, they don't manifest in the physical form, for example, until you're in your 40s or 50s, for example, except a couple, which may be hair loss and erectile dysfunction, which is happening sooner and sooner, from what I hear. Now, how can somebody tell if they're at risk for too many blood vessels or too few angiogenesis?
Right. Well, when I was in medical school, we had a handful of risk factors for diseases like cancer and cardiovascular disease and diabetes. And family history is definitely one of those risk factors. So if you're somebody who actually has a close relative, a first-degree relative, a parent, a sibling, a grandparent, an uncle who has had one of these diseases, and by the way, that's very common, right? Most of us know somebody with diabetes or somebody with heart disease or somebody who has had cancer. Then it means that you're at risk. And frankly, we're also at risk even without family history, because only 30% or less 10% or less of cancers are actually due to genetics. Now, that means 90% of cancer, as just an example, profound example, is due to our environment, our diet, our lifestyle, our occupations, how we live our lives. And so, I was describing earlier about, our DNA and how it protects ourselves from the environment. There is a price that we have to pay for being alive on planet Earth. If you live in a sunny climate and you go outside and you're at the beach or getting sun, kind of walking in the sunshine, which is a really pleasant thing, walking by the beach, you're getting ultraviolet radiation that's damaging your skin, aging your skin, mutating your skin. If you sit in traffic in a sunny environment and you have the window down and the sun is shining in through the open window, DNA damage. Okay. If you are filling up your gas with your car with gas, I always say, are you standing upwind or downwind? Because and most people don't know, but if you smell the gas, you're standing downwind. You're breathing in these solvents that are causing DNA damage in your lung. So the question is, why don't we get more cancer more often if we're continuously bombarded by the environment? I mean, even new furniture, that off-gassing, that's solvents, So people like the smell of it, but honestly, that's damaging. And our body's hardwired defense system, our DNA, actually repairs itself and fixes the damage on an everyday basis. So how we live, where we live, what we do has a profound impact on attacks our defenses, and that's why we have to attack and defend back. Here's another thing that actually is a lot of younger people don't appreciate, because like when you're in college, you're superhuman, yes. Bulletproof, as they say. But something I used to do all the time when I was in college is pull all-nighters and stay up late. Turns out that sleep, good quality sleep, is one of those times where your body actually busts out its defenses to repair your brain, to repair your immune system, to repair your skin, even feed your hair. And so it's really, really important to actually get good quality sleep. And if you don't have good quality sleep, your body has to work harder to defend itself from the environment.
Oh, that's very well said. And luckily for us, sleep is having somewhat of a health renaissance, which means people are paying more attention to it. They're tracking their sleep. They're biohacking their sleep, if you will. So that's very good news. Now, Dr. Lee, as you laid out in the book, there's obviously foods that you can eat to, at least from a angiogenesis standpoint, to counteract on both sides. If you have too much, you can use foods to reduce it. If you have too little, you can use foods to enhance angiogenesis. Is there a risk of these foods taking you over the edge on the other side? Or is it just, in terms of natural foods, they're just bringing you back to homeostasis?
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about cancer, too many blood vessels growing in the wrong place. Mm-hmm. But there's also situations like heart disease where you don't have enough blood vessels growing in your heart that can lead to heart attacks, or you aren't able to heal your wounds because you have a deficiency of blood vessels. And you can eat foods that can actually stimulate the blood vessels as well, like apple peels and capers and those kinds of things can actually stimulate our blood vessel. Chocolate can also, dark chocolate with cacao can actually stimulate blood vessels to grow as well. But what's interesting is this big question. So if I ate things that are helping my blood vessels grow, am I causing cancers to grow? And if I fight cancer by cutting off the blood supply of a tumor, am I going to cause a heart attack? This is something that, when I first got into this field of angiogenesis, it was one of the primary questions out there. But here's the great news of what we've learned. Your body knows how to titrate exactly what you need. So you never grow more blood vessels than you have to. So if you eat foods, it'll just grow up to a certain level and it'll stop. And if you've got too many blood vessels and you're eating an anti-angiogenic food, cut off the blood vessels, it just prunes it down. It's kind of like mowing the lawn. It'll mow it only to a certain level, and then it leaves everything else alone. So our body knows how to keep this perfect Goldilocks zone in great shape. And that's why you don't have to worry about eating too much soy or too many apple peels. Your body will figure out what it needs and get rid of everything else.
That is amazing. What a fascinating body we have. Now, I want to turn our attention to a question that a lot of men would be interested in, and maybe even women now, and that is hair loss in particular. We know, or the science has proven that hair loss happens hand in hand with decreased blood flow. We don't know if that's a factor causing it or is just a correlation at this point from the research that I've seen, but definitely there's lesser blood flow in the areas of hair thinning. And so we can use some of the principles that you've laid out in your book to help improve some of the angiogenesis or blood vessel formation in the hair. Now, I want to make one quick distinction in that. Is the number of blood vessels different than the pressure? Meaning, could you have enough blood vessels in your scalp but still not have enough blood flow to those blood vessels? Or are those two the same thing, meaning more blood vessels means more blood flow?
Well, more blood vessels do mean more blood flow, but the blood vessels have to be open and clear. And so you can't have them blocked up. And this is where you need to actually make sure that you're eating proper healthy fats as opposed to harmful fats that can actually clog up our circulation. The thing about hair is really important because most people don't know that a single hair is at the base of it is a little bulb, a hair bulb. Looks like, like an onion, like the base of an onion. And that's the hair root that it's growing from, and it keeps the rest of the hair alive. And supporting that hair bulb is a single blood vessel feeding it. And if that blood vessel is compromised, and if the blood vessel is feeding that single blood vessels, are compromised, so you have less blood vessels, then the hair has a harder time staying alive. It's kind of like, think about like a lawn that doesn't get enough water. The grass is going to dry up and die, and that's actually what can happen in the scalp.
Mm-hmm. Great. So then, what would you recommend for people that are going through hair loss? Obviously, I think the obvious answer would be to stock up on foods that increase angiogenesis and blood vessel formation, and that should increase the blood flow to your hair. And we know that increased blood flow to hair does give you better hair, because one of the leading FDA-approved drugs, which is called Rogaine or minoxidil, acts as a vasodilator, which means it's bringing more blood to your existing blood vessels. It doesn't necessarily grow more blood vessels, but this could be an even better solution. Would it not be?
Yeah, and actually, by causing vasodilation, by opening up and creating better blood flow, it turns out that minoxidil and similar medicines like it actually cause your blood vessels to release new proteins that grow more blood vessels. So in fact, indeed, this is actually helping to create better circulation. You know, I think generally speaking, you want to keep your blood flow open and flowing, and you want to avoid things that could clog it, and then you want to kind of keep promoting good circulation going. And by the way, the other thing that actually helps circulation, blood flow going, is regular exercise, which is really important, and stress management, because high levels of cortisol, stress hormone, actually cause vasoconstriction. So you want to, we want to take care of this. Think of your hair as your lawn. You really want to keep it well watered so it's happy.
Yeah, absolutely. And Dr. Lee, I've also been doing over the last few months another technique, which sounds barbaric to some people, but it's really derma rolling, which allows tiny needles to prick my hair, cause micro wounds, which causes, angiogenesis, actually to grow new blood vessels. And then obviously the body's trying to repair that, which is along the same principles as you're talking about. I want to turn my attention to one of the other problems that men have in particular, which is ED, erectile dysfunction, and it's growing, I believe. Now that I'm talking to more and more men, I realize how pervasive it's getting. Using a derma roller on your penises does not seem like a fun experience. How would you suggest people improve the circulation in their nether regions, be that male or female?
Right. Well, there are many different causes of erectile dysfunction, just like there are many different causes of hair loss. And circulation is certainly one of them, but it's really important to kind of go to the right specialist to try to make sure that you are not suffering from a reversible cause or a different cause that needs different kind of medical attention. But as it relates to ED, the treatments that have been developed, the medical treatments that have been developed, like Viagra and Cialis and all of those, that whole family of medicines, what they do, they just cause vasodilation. They just get better blood to flow in there. And so one thing is, those are the treatments that actually do work pretty well for most people. But the other thing you want to make sure you do is not actually do things that can be harmful for those blood vessels in your penis or around the clitoris as well. And some of the things that are really harmful, are smoking. Smoking cigarettes is really highly connected to damage of those blood vessels. The other thing is, too much alcohol can also wreak havoc. High fatty diets also impair those blood vessels, and diabetes, pre-diabetes, can actually be a problem there as well. And in diabetes, you're also not just damaging blood vessels, you're damaging nerves. And everything that needs to be working in that machine, those machinery, that you're talking about, involves blood vessels and nerves. So those are two things you don't want to destroy. So I think, certainly staying away from things that can cause the damage, and then keeping the function good, exercise, good plant-based diets, can all help. Eating healthy fats can actually help to promote blood flow as well.
I want to ask you one thing. That's obviously there's a couple of diets these days that are gaining popularity. There's, I guess, the movement to eat more saturated fats these days, and people saying they're not as harmful as we once thought. And of course, there's the carnivore diet, which is gaining in popularity, where yes, you're eating an animal that's from nose to tail, so you're eating all the organs that have nutrients. You're also eating, animals that are eating organic food or grass-fed, for example. What is your opinion on saturated fats and carnivore diets?
Well, I have to respond to that like a scientist, and all the evidence that has been accumulating shows that at the medical level shows that saturated fats are not good for you. They're not good for you, not just in terms of their damage to the lining of the blood vessels in your body, in your heart, and elsewhere in your brain even. But the other thing that they do is they harm your gut microbiome, the bacteria. And studies have shown that, basically eating saturated fat will change the ecosystem in your gut away from healthy bacteria to allowing more unhealthy, damaging, inflammatory bacteria to grow. So, I would say, again, it's one of these things where, it's a good thought, but probably the wrong idea. It's not translated the right way. The scientists will tell you that, like, nah, there's no way of interpreting this as a good thing. In fact, it's a bad thing. In fact, we're finding out more about why it's actually harmful. So I would say saturated fats is incontrovertible in terms of the evidence that it's actually not good for you. That said, if you're going to eat, if you have occasionally some saturated fat, as long as it's not what you're mostly eating, I think, if your health defenses are good, you can afford to, fall off the wagon every now and then. Now, let's talk about meat. There's a lot of discussion about meat, and eating meat's not good for the planet, not good for the environment, harms the climate. I'm not an environmentalist, although I believe in the cause. I leave it to other people to do all the calculation and the science. To think about sustainable agriculture and regenerative agriculture and the impact of animals. Here's what I will tell you is that it's really clear that eating red meat is not really good for you. It also changes your microbiome. In fact, it can change your microbiome like within 24 hours. They've actually studied this. Like people, you eat a big steak, you measure your poop for your bacteria when you're healthy, then you eat a steak. In 24 hours, your gut bacteria will change in response to that meat. Now, it'll recover. It takes about 2 weeks to actually get back to where it was. That's a long time for it to pay. That's a long price to pay. Long time to pay for the price for having a steak. But like I said, I like to be a reasonable person, which means that every now and then, if you eat something you really, really love, it's probably okay. But you shouldn't be doing it regularly. Now, here's another rule, though. I would say is that it is also incontrovertible that processed meats are not good for you. Processed meats are things that, like meats from a factory that come dried, like the things that, I don't know, I'm probably like everyone else listening to this or watching this is you grow up eating, deli meats and all kinds of stuff that gets served, all processed meats. In fact, the World Health Organization has classified processed meats as a carcinogen. And we don't know if it's due to the nitrates. It's probably not due to the nitrates. It's probably due to something else that's going on. And it's probably linked to our gut bacteria as well.
Okay, great. Thank you. We would be remiss, we're coming up on our list of questions here, but we would be remiss if in the age of COVID-19, we didn't talk about immunity, especially against the coronavirus. And I know you're doing a little bit of research on that, Dr. Lee. So if you wouldn't mind explaining to the audience the two types of immune systems that we have, the innate and the adaptive, and how we consumers, individuals, can actually improve the immunity of our bodies against this crazy virus out there.
Yeah, sure. Our immune system is a really complicated defense system in the body. And it's a good thing it's complicated because, we're exposed to bacteria and viruses and fungus all the time. Even before the pandemic, we're surrounded by bugs. And we don't want to be taking antibiotics. It's best to use our body's immune system, better to kill it with our immune system than any drug that can be invented. The intrinsic immune system is really kind of like how our body is innately hardwired to prevent invaders from coming into our body, and kind of like a home invader. There's a door lock. There's a guard dog. Those are the hardwired systems. It doesn't matter who's trying to break into your house; they're going to respond the same way. They'll be alarmed. The adaptive system is once intruders in your house, they learn how to do combat, and they recognize, if they're invading the house and the guard dog isn't enough, then we got to take them out. And that's when you kind of like go in and bust out the more serious weapons. And once you've had, your body's had an experience of fighting hand-to-hand combat with the adaptive system, it memorizes it. And so the next time somebody like that comes into your house, you know exactly how to take them out. And that's what the adaptive immune system is. And what I usually tell people is that try not to worry too much about all the different parts of the immune system, because it's really complicated even for doctors. Mm-hmm. I would like to introduce the idea that think of your immune system as a army of super soldiers that all have their own weapons, all have their own training, and all do their own thing. Like Marines, Rangers, SEALs, they all do their own thing. You don't need to know everybody's name. You don't need to know all their weapons. I mean, like, it's cool if you're into that stuff, but really just remember that it's a bunch of super soldiers. And they guard the front gate to prevent intruders from coming in. And if they come in, they learn how to take them out. And that's about as complicated as you need to know, with the exception of thinking of like what's going on in the pandemic. So in the spring of 2020, I actually became a COVID researcher because I realized there was something I could contribute to helping to fight the coronavirus. And my contribution was really trying to understand what the virus was doing. So I worked together with a group of researchers who we all got autopsy tissue from people who died of COVID-19 and dove in at the pathology level and the genetic level to really figure out what's going on. And here's what we found that was really quite startling, is that this respiratory virus, which does invade the lung and causes a bad respiratory lung disease, also makes a beeline in your body to infect blood vessels, or lungs filled with blood vessels. And by invading the blood vessels, it damages, trashes your circulation from the inside out. Now remember, I study angiogenesis, so this brought this pandemic right back into my kitchen, kind of like into my wheelhouse, where I suddenly realized, well, wow, we actually can do something about this because we can actually protect our circulation. And that's what we're doing right now, is diving deeper into our research to figure out what is going on with COVID-19 in our circulation. And a lot of the long hauler syndrome that we're seeing, people who are having difficulty recovering, we think it's due to blood vessel damage. A lot of the weird strokes and blood clots and all that that's definitely due to blood vessel damage. And so this is why it's so important to prevent us from getting COVID-19 by wearing a mask and social distancing and washing our hands, all the basic things that we know need to be done. It's so foolish to go out into a COVID party to get the disease, to get it over with, because what we believe now is that even when you get over the respiratory virus, it's left behind like a trashing of your circulation, which you could live with for the rest of your lives. We may have a second epidemic from this first wave of COVID of damage to our blood, of our circulation, that we're not going to see for years to actually come. So that's why, to prevent being infected, what we want to do is eat to beat the COVID-19. And the best things you can do are, shoring up your immunity. Vitamin C foods can actually boost your immunity. The hardwiring of the immune system. Eating mushrooms with beta-glucan, a natural compound, increase in natural antibodies you secrete in your mucus. Eating blueberries and blackberries can increase our body's T cells. T immune cells are like one of those super soldiers that can fight bacteria. And by the way, there was a really interesting study out of Wuhan from the early group of people in China who were experiencing COVID-19, and they were studying what was in their blood that could help people resist COVID. And it was a natural virus killer called interferon gamma. Our body makes it, interferon gamma. And they asked, what was it about people who had that natural virus killer in their gut? And they found bacteria that were classic for being associated with this natural virus killer. Then they said, what were common foods that people were eating that would cause the gut to change in a way to actually create the virus killer? And it was green tea, nuts, high fiber, and omega-3 fatty acids. And so, by the way, there's no virus, there's no cure. Our doctors don't really know how to treat COVID-19, but all of a sudden, Mother Nature has revealed through real people that are studying COVID that there's some foods that can actually improve our body's own defenses, our body's own immune defenses to fight the virus. And so this is obviously not the only answer, but it is something that we can all do for ourselves at home, is to eat to actually boost our immunity.
That's great. And that goes right back to what you talk about as well, which is eat to beat disease. Speaking of that, I loved your book and I'm sure I will reread it many, many times in the months and years to come. And for everybody that's listening, please go get the book. You will do yourself a huge favor. You can get it on Amazon. And is there another place, Dr. Lee, that they can get it on?
Yeah, you can get Eat to Beat Disease anywhere books are sold online, and when bookstores open back up. And also, I'm continuously tweeting and putting out more information on Instagram about what we're finding. You can come to my website at www.drdrwilliamleeli.com, drdrwilliamleeli.com, or follow me on social at Dr. William Lee. And you'll see all the new stuff that's also coming up, because this field of food as medicine is starting to really pick up steam. And so, every week we're beginning to learn something new that could be useful for people that, just have to go to the pantry, go to the refrigerator. We're learning in the pandemic to we're reacquainting ourselves with the kitchen. And there's all these things that we can do to help ourselves resist disease.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I will include all those links as well in the show notes to this episode, which is going to be at antiaginghacks.net/eat to beat disease. Dr. Lee, thank you so much for dropping so much knowledge and coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
It's a real pleasure. Thank you for having me on.